Neyland didn't immediately realize what was happening when a sharp sound swept through the station's corridors. It didn't sound like the music he listened to before going to sleep, nor like the hum of the various maintenance mechanisms, but it evoked some distant associations. Grudgingly, Neyland set the tester aside and stood up from his desk. Of course, the light control unit of the hydroponic farm needed urgent repair, but the harsh sound made it hard to concentrate, which Neyland already had a lot of trouble with. The central control panel. It was there if there was anywhere to find a solution to the problem. Neyland tried to think, but his memory refused to give a clue. Of course, it could be changed. All he had to do was stop. Neyland shook his head and dismissed the insidious thought. He must remain calm and not do anything rash. Neyland walked down the radial corridor to the central circular room where the station's main control panel was located. The bright red signal was blinking insistently on the console. Neyland stepped closer, already knowing what this sudden intrusion into his measured, unhurried life meant. A ship of some kind was approaching the station. Strange. Neyland didn't remember anyone planning to visit him anytime soon. From the other hand, he didn't remember a lot. He looked around the central console room, paying particular attention to the board on which he usually left reminder notes to himself. Nothing. Neyland shrugged and sat down in the chair by the console. Well, at least he needs to contact the ship and find out what it needs. His hands remembered what to do and what buttons to press. The long-range scanner screen lit up, followed by the friend or foe recognition system and some other indicators and displays. Neyland felt that if he tensed up, he might remember what it was all for, but he didn't want to tense up. The recognition system screen read, TFC Swift, Terran Federation Cutter. Yes, some things stay in the brain forever, as if seared away, no matter what happens. But what could the military possibly need from him? An old, retired man leading a reclusive lifestyle. As one might expect from the military, they were unwilling to request a communication session, and Neyland made no attempt to call them. Why? He couldn't keep them out of the station. There was no way to do that. When they arrived, they would tell him what they wanted. Neyland didn't know how many years he'd been living on the station, but he suspected it was a long time. He had learned to wait patiently for the unknown. The ship arrived about 5 hours later. Neyland arrived at the door of the second landing hangar in advance, and as soon as the hatch slid open, he stepped inside. Everything about the spaceship's contours spoke of speed. The narrow, predatory silhouette, the massive thickening of the powerful engines aft. This was clearly a dual-purpose ship for both open space and atmospheric flight. Why else would it have streamlined shapes? Neyland didn't notice any armament, but he had no doubt there was some. An entrance ramp lowered onto the corrugated metal of the hangar deck, and 2 men in Space Fleet uniforms stepped out of the ship. At the sight of the insignia, Neyland involuntarily twitched his right arm. You bet, military reflexes. Funny, he couldn't remember his last military rank, but he could tell it was a captain and a rear admiral on the boat. It seems his own rank was lower. Commander Neyland? Ah, there it is. Captain Costa. Neyland shook his outstretched hand. It was a typical military handshake, clear, confident, and official. And this is Rear Admiral Matiescu. Another formal handshake. I served with your brother, Commander, the Rear Admiral said. He had sharp facial features and bottomless brown eyes, and his uniform fit as if he'd been born in it, already starched and ironed. Neyland got a strong feeling that this was a real combat commander, not a master of political and staff intrigue. Both officers had colorful award plaques on their chests, but Neyland had no idea what they meant. The Admiral looked at Neyland with some confusion, obviously not having met the expected reaction to the remark about his brother. Neyland sighed. I'm sorry if I disappoint you somewhat. The thing is, I don't remember my brother. He was silent for a moment. Strictly speaking, I don't remember if I have any relatives at all. After a dozen seconds, the awkward silence was broken by Captain Costa. Commander, I assume you have some room where we can sit down and talk in peace? I suspect we're in for a long and complicated conversation. The problem is, we're losing this war, Commander, and we don't even understand why it started, Costa finished. But there remains one tiny chance that you might be able to help us. Neyland, pondering, looked at him silently. In many years alone on the station, he had grown unaccustomed to hearing others speak and expressing his thoughts aloud, and the information he had just heard took some time to comprehend. According to Captain Costa, a conflict between the Earth Federation and the Antares Conjunction had erupted around the Sigma entity that Commander Neyland had discovered 15 years ago in the multiple star system of 30 Aries. More specifically, the conjunction suddenly severed all diplomatic ties with the Federation. It soon began attacking Earth ships and stations near the 30 Aries system, failing to respond to any inquiries. Throughout the conflict, which has dragged on for several years now, the only message received from the conjunction was the cryptic phrase, "Destroy the beacons," which they occasionally transmitted on all communication frequencies used by the Federation. We believe the conjunction is afraid of competition. Admiral Matiescu entered the conversation. They've always prided themselves on being the furthest advanced in temporal research, but since we've gotten serious about studying the Sigma entity, we've made some important breakthroughs. Scientists believe the object may be a wormhole into a different universe where time behaves differently and has other characteristics. How much different? It was the first question Neyland had asked, and it was so sudden that the Admiral was even confused. Captain Costa came to his rescue. We do not know for sure, he said. Existing hypotheses are too different from each other and are closer to guesses than to sound scientific hypotheses. But this research has clearly alarmed the conjunction enough for them to decide to go into full-scale conflict. Neyland stared blankly for a while. What does this have to do with me? He finally asked. What can one man do on the scale of an interstellar war? I'm not even a scientist. The captain and the admiral looked at each other. You see, Commander, Costa started to say, but Neyland gestured him to stop. What you've told me sounds like a fascinating story, of course, he continued, but no more than that. I don't remember the Sigma entity you say I discovered. Moreover, I don't remember what worlds make up the Earth Federation or what the Antares Conjunction is. I don't even remember what I had for dinner last night, but most importantly, I don't want to remember it. Neyland stood up and left the room without looking at the two officers. The Admiral looked at Costa. I remind you that this was your idea. What did you drag me to this shithole for? We could have just as easily sent in a special forces platoon. That's what it's gonna end up being, except we're not commando. What if he's just messing with our heads? He's our last chance, Costa said. And I don't think he's lying. Remember what happened to the others, and some of them even volunteered. We already know what they're capable of. Until they go off the rails, the Admiral said. It cost us 2 fine ships and their crews. And Neyland, I remind you, was the worst case of all. He was the only one brought back from the first expedition in a straitjacket. There were no straitjackets on the Pascal. Well, I was just speaking figuratively. You know as well as I do that Neyland had to be tranquilized and sedated until he arrived in quarantine, and now he claims he doesn't remember having a brother. But he is the only one who escaped from the clinic, a secret clinic of the space fleet, mind you, and as if disappeared into space and then became monstrously rich and through fake persons bought this abandoned station in the godforsaken star system. I think that fits right in with my assumption that he's just messing with our heads, the Admiral said, quite in the spirit of his manipulations. Costa shook his head. In my opinion, all this indicates Neyland's one indomitable desire. And what is that? The desire for oblivion. Total oblivion. The Admiral scratched his chin thoughtfully. Sounds logical. But why not just kill himself? 3 of Pascal's crew did just that in the first 2 years after contact with the Sigma entity. I'm not even talking about our current situation. I guess that's a question only Neyland can answer, Costa said. If, of course, he wanted to remember the answer. Neyland knew what it all meant. The viscous, dark void of absent memory offered no clues, but everything was clear without it. His measured, leisurely life on the station, devoid of any colorful events, had come to an end. It did not matter what answer he would give to the officer's request. Neyland strongly suspected that if they really needed him that badly, they would not leave him alone under any circumstances. At the very least, they would simply tie him up and take him away by force. Sometimes he wondered why that past Neyland, who had organized his reclusive life on the station, had left him nothing, no notes, no reminders, no letters of the future, warning him of dangers and risks. Something he knew, this long-ago version of his self, something that could not be passed on to his future self, even in this indirect way. Neyland put his palm to the reader. The safe door slid open, and its interior was illuminated by a dim, bluish light. Neyland picked up the injector from the center shelf and pressed a key in the wall of the safe. A servo mechanism buzzed lightly, and a clip with an unmarked glass vial emerged from a special slot. Neyland looked at it thoughtfully. What would happen if he missed an injection, or say, shoot 2 at once? The fact that he could still think about it told him that either nothing would happen, if he had already experimented in the past, or something bad would happen, if the decision made by his distant past self was stronger than the momentary impulses even after so many years and injections. He inserted the vial into the injector, pressed its nozzle against the bend of his elbow, and pressed the trigger. A short hiss, a slight prick. That was it. His 2-day life, as he called his existence on the station, would continue. The drug contained in the vial erased all memory beyond the day before yesterday. The skills necessary for life were preserved, and some core of personality was retained too. But all the events of his previous life were for Neyland, an impenetrable blob of faceless darkness. That was what he had decided long ago. These two, Captain Costa and Admiral Matiescu, claimed that at least 15 years had passed since. Perhaps? Neyland didn't keep count of days or years, but he guessed he'd been living on the station for more than a year. He put the injector back. He needed to tell the officers something. They were obviously in a hurry to hear his answer. But what? Neyland was about to close the safe when his gaze fell on an object on the bottom shelf. A small, flat silver metal case, sturdy-looking and with a DNA reader on the lock. It had always been here, but Neyland had never inquired about its origin or contents, for he had no intention of leaving the station and had everything he needed to live. The unfamiliar items symbolized surprises and change, the very things he was sheltering from here. But now, surprise and change were coming to him. Neyland pulled out the briefcase, placed it on the table next to the safe, and put his finger on the reader. The lock clicked, and Neyland opened the case. In a padded nest of sealant lay an injector, exactly the same as the one on the top shelf in the safe. Several dozen vials gleamed in small recesses around it and in the top lid of the case. Neyland carefully closed the case, then, without putting it back, locked the safe. It looked like that long-ago forgotten Neyland had left him one message after all. "It sounds too simple," the Admiral said doubtfully. "First, he says he wants nothing to do with us, and just an hour later, he's backing down." "Not exactly, Christian." Despite the difference in rank, Costa and Matiescu were longtime friends and addressed each other by their first names. He said he didn't want to remember anything about his past. He agreed as soon as he saw the opportunity to go with us, while respecting this condition. But would it do any good? The Admiral's face showed clear doubt. "Ruiz, I agreed to this venture out of desperation. Yes, the rest of the Pascal's crew helped us hold off the conjunction onslaught, but not to turn the tide of the war. The ring around the Sigma entity is tightening. We can't give it to the conjunction. The loss of such a source of power and so many potential discoveries would be tantamount to a clear defeat in the war and the dominance of the conjunction for centuries. They are already ahead of us in temporal research. Their unsynchronized torpedoes. Neyland is the last survivor of the first contactors. What are we going to do when he's gone too? Besides, he was the craziest of the bunch. Will he even make it? Honestly, Christian?" The captain looked his friend straight in the eye. "I don't know. But this is our last chance, no matter how elusive it may seem, and we have no right not to take it." They had managed to slip unnoticed between the numerous conjunction patrols near the Sigma entity. It was for this reason that they had used a small cutter for the expedition to Neyland's station, one with a maximum capacity of 3 people, but very fast. Any other larger ship would have been detected by the Antherians. Back at the station, Neyland came to them and said he was willing to help in any way he could on one condition. No one interfered with his injection regimen. "I don't know what would happen if I stopped taking them or lowered the dose," he said in the same indifferent tone. "You know my past much better than I do. However, I believe it would probably not be to my liking or yours. I don't know how I can help you, but I'll try." "Wait." He stopped Costa, who was about to explain. "Tell me everything just before the main thing starts. Everything you tell me now, I will forget tomorrow at the latest, or even after today's injection. You're just wasting your time now." Now, the moment was approaching. Observers reported that the conjunction forces were concentrating on the approaches to the 30 Ares system, clearly planning to go on a decisive offensive. The Federation fleet was urgently reorganizing orders in an effort to cover the research stations and huge energy receptors located around the space-time anomaly of the Sigma entity. The object was the size and mass of a brown dwarf, but it looked completely different. A giant ball of swirling purple haze, opaque to any instrumentation and distorting the continuum around it in ways not yet fully understood. The research ship, Blaise Pascal, plunged into the outer layers of this ball a decade and a half ago, only to return with unique, strange data and a half-crazy crew. Now, there was only one survivor of that crew, who had been inside the entity the longest since he piloted a separate science module, Commander Neyland. When Costa and Matiescu entered the bridge of the Space Fleet's flagship, the line ship Gondwana, Neyland was already there. "Let's not waste time," Costa told him. "The conjunction fleet had already started moving toward us. We know that all those who were on the Pascal at the moment of contact have taken from it the ability to foresee the future and perhaps, to some extent, to influence it by changing what they see. The Antherians use against us so-called unsynchronized missiles and torpedoes, capable of falling out of our continuum for a short time and then returning to it at the very last moment, giving our ships no chance to dodge or shoot them down. Your colleagues have been able to sometimes anticipate the appearance of these missiles and save ships. Scientists believe that your proximity to the Sigma entity, combined with your previous experience of close contact, will probably activate some new abilities in you too. Neyland looked at Costa. Did my predecessors also have memory problems? He asked in an expressionless tone. Costa looked at the Admiral. Most of them, yes, he said, though not to the extent that you have. And they managed. Yes, Costa answered, not going into details. He did not want to continue the conversation in that direction. In fact, it was those who had the most memory damage who did the best, until they turned into deranged maniacs obsessed with destruction. All right, Neyland said calmly. I'll give it a try. Estimated time of contact? Costa glanced at the screen with a summary of the observation posts. 50 minutes. Neyland nodded, and under the stares of the officers, pressed the injector to his forearm. Putting it away into a briefcase, he stood with eyes closed for a few seconds, then sat back in the chair and said, "So what exactly am I supposed to do?" The attack by the conjunction fleet began with the usual mass transmission over all possible communication ranges. Destroy the beacon! The message was even transmitted in text format, appearing as senderless emails on every possible device. The only reaction this time was an alert on all ships. The Admiral thought the Antherians could have achieved much better results without shouting their approach to all space. However, the psychology of non-humanoids was complicated and poorly understood. He would not argue with them. A few minutes later, the first missile and torpedo launches from the Antherian ships began to be reported. Most of them were regular weapons, and the Earth fleet's defense systems could more or less handle them, but a few disappeared from the scanner screens almost immediately after launch. The data on those launches was displayed on the special screen Neyland was sitting in front of, but the commander didn't even look at it. Instead, he closed his eyes and spoke. Frigate Nile, release plasma traps in 18 seconds. Cruiser Baikal, maximum barrage on vector 4 gamma right now. Cruiser Nepal, evasive maneuvers, and aft shields to max in 40 seconds. Corvette Oslo. Space was abuzz with ships, missiles, bursts, beams, and overstressed force shields. The big ships fought at great distances, but simultaneously released clouds of small raiders, fighters, and torpedo bombers. Small spacecraft were darting everywhere, like schools of small predatory fish, flitting between the huge, clumsy sperm whales and sharks. The conjunction fleet concentrated its efforts in two directions. One strike force was trying to break through to the Sigma entity, the other targeting the Earth flagship. The Antherians somehow seemed to realize that that was where Neyland was, negating the advantage of their most advanced weapons, unsynchronized missiles and torpedoes. Large drops of sweat rolled down Neyland's face, but he continued to nonchalantly dictate the actions necessary to save the Earth ships. Neither side could achieve any appreciable advantage, and at one point, the Antherians paused active operations to regroup. "How are you, Commander?" Costa asked. Neyland shrugged. "Tired, but so far so good." Costa looked at Neyland carefully, searching for signs of a possible impending collapse, as he had seen in several contactors before. So far, nothing was visible. Of course, Neyland's condition was being closely monitored with sophisticated equipment by two medics, but even that hadn't helped in the past. "You know, I have a strange feeling," Neyland said. Costa and the medics looked at him worriedly. "It's like everything's going as planned, as if I'm not saving ships from destruction, but just reading out some script in which nothing depends on me at all." "What do you mean?" Neyland paused, searching for words. You said I can change the future by saving ships from missiles that fall out of our time. Well, I don't think I'm changing anything. I just know the future. That's all. I remember it, like normal people can remember the past. And what I will say is just an element of that unchanging future. Costa stared at the commander in puzzlement. What if you say something else? Neyland thought for a moment. You don't understand, he said. I can't say anything else. There's no changing that. And it's scary. I think I understand now why that previous version of me made that decision 15 years ago. He nodded at the briefcase at his feet. Tell me, would you like to know your future, provided you can't change anything about it? Costa shook his head slowly and suddenly noticed that the admiral behind Neyland's back was desperately giving him some signs. Just a moment, said the captain to Neyland and approached the admiral. Listen, said the admiral, taking him aside. Ask him how the battle will end. He doesn't know. His drug completely blocks all but the shortest memory. I think he would have told me a long time ago. It doesn't block anything. I mean, maybe it does, but it's not the drug he's on. I've spoken to the special operations. They switched his capsules with saline. Costa looked dumbfounded at the admiral, then furtively looked back at Neyland. Are you crazy? What if he now turns into a squealing idiot like the rest of them? The admiral shrugged. As you can see, he didn't. To tell you the truth, I never believed him. They're still in the lab figuring out what he was injecting himself with, but I bet it had nothing to do with memory. Oh, here's the report. He took a piece of paper from the man in the special branch uniform who approached him and ran his eyes over it. So, what's here? That's odd. It can't be. Can't be. Costa snatched the sheet from his trembling hand, already guessing what it said. Skipping the intricate chemical formulas that told him little, he went straight to the conclusion. The drug, which Neyland had been injecting for a decade and a half, was indeed a powerful memory blocker, the likes of which even experienced intelligence specialists had never encountered. With a decrease in the drug concentration in the blood, memory would begin to return, but not instantly, as if gradually rolling back to more recent events. The scientists estimated the rate of return to be several hours a minute. But that means that... Costa looked back. Neyland was still sitting in his chair, waiting for the next attack to begin. So, his memory of the future still hadn't kicked in? Or, Costa suddenly had a frightening thought. He gestured to one of the medics. Tell me, memory can be lost for many reasons, right? Except for artificial medication? He asked. Of course, the medic nodded. Most often as a result of organic brain damage, trauma, poisoning, oxygen deprivation, B1 vitamin deficiency, to name few. And psychological causes? Absolutely. Severe stress, such as the death of a loved one or the threat of death. In fact, that's exactly what we're assuming for the rest of the Pascal crew. Only Neyland himself voluntarily deprived himself of memory. And why do you ask? Costa did not have time to answer. A surprised exclamation sounded from the observation post. The Antherians are leaving, every last ship. Some have already entered jump mode. He was echoed by reports from other ships in the fleet. It worked! The admiral slapped Costa on the back so the captain almost fell over. It worked! Do you understand? We won. They're running away. Sir, transmission from the Antherians. Everyone turned to the communications officer on watch. He put the transmission on the general broadcast channels. Too late. The beacon is activated. Leave if you can. Costa turned to the medic again. Tell me, in the case of traumatic amnesia, can a person remember some fragments of the event? The medic shook his head. Highly unlikely. The memory completely blocks the traumatizing event so it does not accidentally resurface, caught in the associative chain. Sometimes, a person even unconsciously makes an extra effort not to remember. His eyes suddenly widened, and he looked at Neyland. "Sir, do you think that—" A sea of blinding purple light splashed out from the optical view screens. All the people on the bridge either squinted or covered their eyes with their hands, and many recoiled or shrieked. A moment later, the protective filters went off, and Costa saw through the rainbow circles that the purple light was not coming only from the screen. Neyland stood with his arms slightly apart, surrounded by a bright purple aura. It even seemed to Costa that narrow fibers of radiance stretched from him toward the screen, but the captain was not sure that his flash-burned retinas accurately recorded what was happening. However, he could clearly see how the second medic who had remained with Neyland reached out to him, but was thrown far aside as soon as he touched the glowing sheath. "Nothing can be changed. Destroy the beacons. The memory completely blocks the trauma." The people on the Pascal touched the Sigma entity and began remembering the future, which traumatized them so much that they went insane and lost their memories. They were changed. They were marked by the Sigma entity. The Antherians knew more about the nature of time than humans. They understood what the markings meant. Their goal wasn't the object itself. They were trying to prevent humans from interacting with it. Their last message before the attack was, "Destroy the beacon." One beacon, the last one, Neyland. Neyland, shrouded in purple waves of light, turned around slowly with effort and said with just his lips, "I didn't want to—" Something rippled on the unthinkably swollen disk of the Sigma entity. Costa drew his laser pistol from its holster, but he couldn't bring himself to fire, and then it was too late. It had been too late for a long time, though. One of the boils on the Sigma entity burst, and out of it appeared the nose of a spaceship of monstrous size. Compared to it, even a kilometer-long flagship looked like a pathetic shell. Following the first Leviathan, others appeared out of the purple fiery chaos. When one of the giants rammed into the science station, turning it into a pile of rubble, one of the Earth cruisers came to its senses and fired a series of missiles at the Leviathan. It was like a little boy splashing a watering can into the mouth of a volcano. A blinding orange beam streaked toward the cruiser, instantly turning it into a cloud of scattered glowing debris. Immediately afterward, the entire hull of the Leviathan glowed with orange dots, orange on black in an ocean of purple. "Beautiful," thought Captain Costa. That was his last thought. The orange beam vaporized him, along with the bridge of the Gondwana and the whole ship, while he was still aiming powerlessly at what had once been Commander Neyland.